history from the University of California, Los Angeles, and she currently teaches American history at George Fox University and Western Oregon University. She's published a number of articles in prominent scholarly journals related to history, and her first book, The Center Net Holes, the 1960 Presidential Election and the Rise of Modern Conservatism, will be coming out in 2009, and I believe she also has another book that's under a chapter that's going to be out probably in 2009 or 2010. So what we'll have is, she's going to do her presentation. I'll comment briefly on the paper, and then we'll open it up for discussion with the audience.
Okay, and I'm going to set this on the podium so that I can see what I'm doing, not to be excessively formal, but simply so I don't have to stoop. My paper, and I've been told this cuts in and out, so if it does, I'll get the other microphone, is titled Kennedy's Loyal Opposition, National Review and the Development of a Conservative Alternative, January to August 1961. So this is part of what potentially could be a larger project looking at conservative responses to the Kennedy administration and its policies. And this will be slightly longer than the traditional 20 minutes, given that I appear to be the only person here. So we'll just get through all of this material, give you some food for thought, and then I certainly welcome your comments. On March 25th, 1961, National Review magazine related the contents of a recent subscriber letter in a back cover subscription appeal. This man, usually understood to be a liberal and well-placed in New York Democratic circles, wrote the magazine and explained, "Of course I am not in agreement with most of your criticism of President Kennedy, nor do I believe you will get far in your obvious editorial support of Senator Barry Goldwater, but renew my subscription, for I can no longer get along without National Review. I find that National Review is a whiskey I must sample once a week. From every other journalist, I get a sensation of either soda pop, and who does not finally gag on effervescent treacly sugar water, or from the intellectual journals of my own persuasion, I now get no more than strained vegetable juices unfermented. So I am now a tippler, $8 a close." The advertisement's writer went on to speculate that perhaps National Review's rarefied appeal stemmed from its very lack of broad-mindedness. Rather, quote, "It is a magazine of fact and opinion, of discourse and criticism on the central questions of our age. Questions identified as dealing with how to meet the communist challenge, resuscitate the spirit in an age of horror, guard one's mind against uniformity in the age of mass appeal, and resist collectivism, preserve freedom and teach love of country, respect for past wisdom, and responsibility to the future." Conservatism circa 1961 was a movement on the rise. Organizational gains during the 1960 election would prove decisive in catapulting Barry Goldwater into the Republican presidential nomination in 1964. While that election's disastrous outcome has been well documented, he lost in a tremendous landslide, Richard Nixon won the 1968 campaign on the strength of far more conservative appeals than those he had espoused in 1960. Not since 1960 have liberal Republicans held this position of dominance within the party. Within this rising movement, National Review was a foundational publication. Founded in 1955 and edited by conservative boy wonder William F. Buckley, Jr., National Review was the first publication, or indeed resource of any kind, to consolidate the various strains of post-war conservatism, combining traditionalist, libertarian, and anti-communist elements to forge what contributing editor Frank Meyer termed fusionism. Historian George H. Nash argued that if National Review, or something like it, had not entered into American life, there would probably have been no cohesive intellectual force on the right in the 1960s and 1970s. National Review was the only publication challenging the liberal consensus in an organized, mass-distributed format. Unabashedly intellectual and everlastingly cutting, it provided information and opinion, and it also gave conservatives a forum for discussion and a means of belonging. National Review brought the conservative masses, to borrow a leftist term, together. Careful perusal of National Review's pages offers perhaps the best insight into the conservative movement's response to the Kennedy administration. Week after week, the pages of National Review and National Review Bulletin, they published in intermittent weeks, provide a detailed source for studying the new frontier through the eyes of the opposition. This paper takes us from the beginning of 1961 to the end of August and the construction of the Berlin Wall. And these are 8 months of anxiety and, from National Review's point of view, declension. So this is definitely counter to a lot of other things that will be expressed over the course of the conference, focusing as it does on Kennedy's achievements. Analysis of the magazine during this period reveals 3 important themes. First, the Kennedy administration's actions in the foreign policy arena revealed a disturbing lack of government resolve in fighting the Cold War on our own terms. From Cuba to Laos, nuclear test ban treaty negotiations, to the strange case of General Edwin A. Walker, Kennedy and his lieutenants failed to understand the dangers of the communist menace, and as a result they routinely subordinated American interests in a misguided attempt to win friends among opponents who operated under a fundamentally different moral order. Second, while politics at home offered numerous cases for concern, the domestic political agenda remained subordinate for National Review to international affairs. After all, it was neither here nor there who funded the schools if they were all teaching Marxist principles in Russian. Despite this hierarchy, however, National Review's commentary on domestic policy issues offers insight into conservative struggles to mediate between principle and strategy as they move beyond the political fringes and onto a more central stage. Finally, National Review carefully followed and in many cases encouraged a new development that offered a way out of the declensionary narrative painted by the distressing actions of the Kennedy administration from week to week. A storm was brewing on college campuses and in youth organizations across the country. The new rebel of the 1960s was a conservative, and most of them recognized National Review editor Bill Buckley as their big brother and guiding influence. There's a certain irony in the rise of conservative youth activism at the very inception of the young and glamorous Camelot era, and National Review gleefully marveled at this reality. The magazine's excitement was palpable, and while the 1960s would soon see the rise of the left-wing radicalism that has remained more notable in the public history of this decade, the course of American history, political history since then demonstrates that in many respects young conservatives did carry the day. So, looking more at the specific policy issues that National Review addressed, from January onward, the magazine expressed considerable concern over Kennedy's intentions toward Fidel Castro, even as its writers advocated a strong response to this communist presence just 90 miles offshore. The columnist Quincy noted that Kennedy was furious with former President Eisenhower for breaking off relations with the Cuban dictator. Eisenhower's action, in the opinion of the magazine, closed the door to a planned policy of appeasement in the Caribbean, which State Department experts working with one-time diplomat A.A. Burrow were sugarcoating for the American public. Even so, foreign policy expert James Burnham urged the administration to make Cuba the litmus of America's resolution to stand firm, despite what he termed the bureaucratic inertia of the State Department. It seemed, as of the April 22nd edition of Burnham's column, The Third World War, that the anti-Castro revolt did have Kennedy's support, but that support must be all out, and it must be carried out with overwhelming power, maximum speed, and total success. Failure would be a catastrophe beyond calculation. Unfortunately, of course, fail it did. In the early days of the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Bulletin pointed out that by all objective analysis, the advantage in Cuba was with Kennedy rather than Khrushchev. Cuba is just 90 short miles off our coast, the editors pointed out, in a sea under our absolute strategic domination. 3 days into the invasion, however, the Soviets' will was proving strong enough to outweigh communist strategic disadvantage. The battle could still be won, but it required an act of will by the one man whose single act in this momentous chapter controls the outcome. By the beginning of May, it was clear that this act of will would not be performed. National Review descended into satire, commenting, perhaps Harvard will even add to the graduate curriculum a course or two on invasions, amphibious, to fill in the little lacunae in the expertise of future Harvard administrations. It would be interesting to know what exactly went wrong, the editors concluded, but ultimately it was the president's lack of will, in their opinion, that caused the catastrophe. However, the editors did offer a way out for the future. Eisenhower had not, they observed, been a particularly reflective man. Kennedy, on the other hand, was more disposed to analyze and learn from his mistakes. Using his comeback against Hubert Humphrey in the West Virginia primary in 1960 as an example, National Review hoped that he might face Cuba with the same determination, courage, and resolution, and in the end win.